When it comes to fitness, in particular, strength training, there's no shortage of big, bold, hot takes, black and white statements, and things that are really designed to get engagement on social media. And these include statements like XYZ is cheating. And when it comes to the gym, when it comes to strength training in general, this concept of something being cheating is really overdone. It's so dramatic. And it's oftentimes lacking in the one thing that we really need in this world. If you're an athletic 40-something woman who loves lifting weights, challenging yourself, and doing hard shit, the Fuel Your Strength podcast is for you. You'll learn how to eat, train, and recover smarter so you build strength and muscle, have more energy, and perform better in and out of the gym. I'm strength nutrition strategist and weightlifting coach, Steph Gaudreau. The Fuel Your Strength podcast dives into evidence-based strategies for nutrition, training, and recovery, and why, once you're approaching your 40s and beyond, you need to do things a little differently than you did in your 20s. We're here to challenge the limiting industry narratives about what women can and should do in training and beyond. If that sounds good, hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app and let's go. Hello there. It's been a hot minute since I've recorded a podcast, and I'm happy to say that Fuel Your Strength is back with some new episodes that I'm going to be rolling out in the near future, and you're listening to the first one right now. I am going to take a little retrospective and do a look back because I think it's important, especially as a woman podcaster in this space. But this year, 2025, is the 10th anniversary of this podcast, of me podcasting. The podcast has had a couple of names along the way, but 10 years of podcasting. I started in June of 2015, so I would be remiss if I did not celebrate and mention the 10th year of this show. And of course, thank all of you, anyone who's ever listened to the podcast, if you've subscribed to the podcast, it matters. It really does. And for everybody who's ever recommended an episode to a friend or a family member or a training partner, you all are why I do this show. And I definitely have enjoyed over the years this gift of being able to connect with you on your favorite podcast platform, but really to bring you some more detailed conversations that are oftentimes very much lacking from the space of social media. So thank you so much for being around, whether you've been listening for a year, a few months, you've just found the show, or you've been with me since the beginning. And of course, a huge thank you to all of my incredible guests that have come on over the years. You really, truly have made such an impact on my community. So thank you to all of my past guests as well. I've also been deep in working on Strong with Steph. So that is my 12-month progressive strength training program for women over 40, but it is not just 12 months. It is now turned into 3 separate years of programming. And I have people in their 3rd year, which is completely mind-blowing to me. And also just so cool to see people's growth over a year, 2 years, 3 years, and how they've made strength training such a consistent part of their lives. Not perfect, but consistency, how they've made a commitment to strength training and challenging themselves and growing and seeing the results of that. And not just in the gym. It is cool to be able to celebrate, especially with my premium members. Those are the people I check in with every single week. And we know each other well by this point. To see people's progress and hear about their PRs and the things that are going well is incredible, but also to hear how strength training is making an impact beyond the gym. Everything from people's osteoporosis screening numbers improving to going on vacation with family. And one of my clients recently told me about how she was getting in and out of a boat all day long, I guess, on vacation. And she couldn't believe how much better her balance was. And she was able to do that so much more easily. And people noticed, and she noticed. And those are the moments that when I hear that, when my lifters share that with me, when I see their posts, when they send me messages, is the best feeling. And we still do roughly quarterly doors open. So if you're curious about when the next one's coming around, you can always reach out to me on social media as well. But the best way to do it is to go and sign up for the wait list. It's a no obligation wait list. You all know how I roll. But if you want the best chance at either one of the limited premium spots, which are always going to fill up, you want the early bird bonuses that I send out if you sign up from the wait list, or you just want to be informed, then you can do that. And I will make sure that that link goes out in the show notes. You can also go to stephgaudreau.com/workout, and I will send you a free week of programming. It's a sample, right? You can only get so much of a taster in a week long, considering the program is a year plus, but you can get a sense for what it's like and what the workouts are structured like. And that's again at stephgaudreau.com/workout. So yeah, that program's rolling along really well. And that's been super cool. I've been updating Strength Nutrition Unlocked. So that program is now in its 4th year, and I'm going back and really adding a lot, improving a lot, but making it super practical for people and focusing on that as sort of the action taking part. So that's over at stephgaudreau.com/apply. Yeah. And that's kind of it. What else has happened since I last did a podcast? I think I had maybe gotten my black belt at the point of which I did my last recording, or I had just received my black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is now seems kind of real, but at the time did not seem real at all. So now a black belt in BJJ, and also, still lifting and doing my thing and still playing drums as well. So I just passed my 1-year anniversary of playing drums. The last thing I'll say is that I'm currently not recording video for this podcast. And the reason is I found myself, it was taking me so much longer to record episodes because the video component, and I'm used to being on video if you follow me on Instagram, I'm on video all the time, especially in my stories. That's nothing new. But there was something about recording quote unquote official video and putting it on YouTube. And I'll still put these episodes on YouTube, just without the video. But there was something about recording myself and being ultra conscious of how I look when I speak and things like that. And it's because YouTube is fucking brutal. The comments are brutal, and my best trolls come from YouTube for sure. But I was focusing, it became such a point of stress for me that it was either taking me way too much time to record, or I was second guessing everything I was saying. It really took me away from sort of the early roots of this podcast, which was a bit more conversational, a bit less formal. And I didn't like that. I like being able to come and hang out with you and have a more relaxed conversation, and also not have to be conscious of myself from outside of myself in that way. So at least for now, I'm sticking to audio only recordings, and you can find them on all of your favorite audio platforms, as well as, yes, still on YouTube, just without the video component. So just a heads up on that too. I know this intro is a bit longer than normally we do, but I feel like I haven't recorded a podcast for at least 6 or 7 months. And so I wanted to make sure I caught you up on, on all the goodness. All right. In this podcast episode, we're going to be talking about some of the things that people will say on social media is cheating when it comes to lifting, but actually isn't. And the reason I bring this up is because, especially if you are a newer person to lifting, maybe you're not brand new, but you're sort of in that beginner to early intermediate phase of lifting, especially in the first year, you are learning so very much. There is so much learning happening, not only in your body, of course, but all of the things that you're learning that go along with lifting and intersect with lifting. everything from how you may need to change your nutrition to noticing that you need to pay more attention to your recovery. Maybe you're doing something like Strong with Steph or another program that uses auto-regulation or something like rate of perceived exertion or reps and reserves. So you're also trying to not only improve your technique, but learn how to gauge your effort. There is so much going on, especially when you're newer, that it is easy to get overwhelmed. And it's easy, even when you're following a program, which I highly encourage you to do, even if you're very, very new. But when you are newer and you are out there and you're seeing messages on social media, even if you're on a program, it's really easy because you may not be as self-assured that you see posts and you start to worry. Is what that person's talking, am I doing this wrong? Are they correct? Am I fucking this up? Is this cheating? Am I somehow shortchanging myself here? Or you start to worry you're doing things wrong. And if you need to know anything, of course, with nutrition, people are always like, oh, it's so individual. Oh, we have to really tailor it to the person. But lifting is similar in that it is also going to be individual and it is going to be kind of personal and contextual, and there is nuance. So yes, we want to focus on the biggest levers. We want to focus on the biggest concepts, the things that give us the most bang for our buck. There's a tendency for people on social media, especially people who make content, to start putting out content that really makes people worry about the nitty gritty, the really tiny things that don't have as much impact. And then those same folks create that content oftentimes to get the algorithm going. And so you get these epic battles in the comment sections. And sometimes people do this very personally because they want engagement. So they create very polarizing content in this way, or content that's very black and white. And it causes people to argue. And so then you get in the comment section and it's a knockdown, drag out battle, or you just see, again, people coming from very different perspectives and commenting or starting to second guess that, are they doing things wrong? And are they messing this up? And do they need a new program? Or, you could probably get how this goes. So I'm going to cover 3 things in this episode that I see. There are so many others. As a quick aside, when I was Olympic weightlifting, I really needed to improve my posterior chain strength. And I did low bar back squat for a long time. And I also did front squat. So that's more of an accessory for having a vertical upright position in Olympic lifting, which is very important. But people were horrified that I would low bar back squat because you tend to have more back angle. You're leaning, you have a little bit more torso lean, a little bit more hip drive in something like a low bar back squat compared to a high bar back squat. So, there are things like that as well. But these are 3 things I see quite often. And I want to address them because chances are you've heard them or you will hear them. And it's helpful to know what some of the context and nuance would be. Before we dive in, if you listen to this episode and you're like, okay, I am ready to get to work. I want to take my strength, muscle, energy, and performance and take it up a notch. I want to take it to that next level. I want to feel like a badass, but at the same time, do it in a way that works with my physiology as an athletic woman over 40 with coaching and community support. Then go ahead and check out Strength Nutrition Unlocked. This is my group program. We're going to lay out the framework for you and guide you as you implement and really customize it to all the things that you're doing, your preferences, your likes, and the places you want to go with it. Then go ahead and get on board. You can start your process by submitting an application at stephgaudreau.com/apply. We would love to hear from you and see you inside the program. Okay, number 1, people will say that machines are cheating. Machines are cheating. Using a machine in the gym of some sort means you're cheating, and the only pure way to I make myself laugh when I say things like this. The only pure way to strength train and to be functional is to use free weights. And I'm going to say, no, machines are not cheating. They can be an excellent way for beginners to learn because you are more fixed in your positioning in the machine. You're not having to necessarily do something like put a barbell on your back and then learn to balance that bar on your back and stabilize your torso and keep everything as upright as possible. And then, by the way, squat down and squat back up. So they're a great way for beginners oftentimes to learn. They could be useful if you are rehabbing an injury. They may be useful for people who have serious concerns with their balance, especially if you're an older person and your balance is not great and maybe you have some bone density loss, or maybe you have fairly advanced osteoporosis. Balance is a huge concern, and it doesn't mean you can't use free weights, but depending on the person, how compromised their balance might be and the severity of the progression, they may need something that gives them a bit more security and safety, like a machine. Obviously, again, a ton of nuance. So if in time you can move to more free weight use because you are able to do that. And so, yeah, many people oftentimes want to either progress to a mixture of free weights and machines, or just free weights if possible. But it doesn't mean that if you are using machines that you're somehow cheating the process of lifting. What matters most at the end of the day is that you're using a load that requires a high effort given the number of reps that you are performing. And we're going to do a podcast on that fairly soon as well, because Lord, I am so sick of this back and forth of people shouting at each other about things like the weight, the load, is it heavy, is it light? We need to sort all this out, but do it on another episode. So machines have a lot of benefit. There are a lot of pluses, but there can also be downsides. For example, figuring out the right settings, knowing how to actually configure the machine correctly for your height, your limb proportions, for example. If you are pretty far outside of the quote unquote average, you're very, very short, or you're very, very tall, or you are a larger bodied person, then the machines may not adjust as comfortably to you. I have a client who's over 6 feet tall. She's about 6'2". And, some machines require a little bit of extra attention when she's setting things up because it's not always as comfortable. And I have clients on the other side. For example, even if you're not using machines, there can still be challenges with free weights. For example, if you're benching and you're very short, you may not have a bench that you can reach the ground super comfortably and use substantial leg drive. So you might have to put squat wedges, or if you've seen me bench, I usually put my feet up on an old aerobic step so I can get enough leg drive because the bench is just too high, those sorts of things. But machines can bring downsides for that reason. Sometimes it's hard to adjust if you're not kind of like the quote unquote average size. And for a lot of my clients that lift at home, they're lifting at home and machines are kind of impractical for that reason. Most people don't have machines in their garage. Maybe a cable stack or something like that. But we can oftentimes introduce something like a pulley system without needing a full stack. And there are options for that. So just know that if you are using machines and somebody's like, that's cheating, it's probably missing a lot of context. They're not understanding why you might have made that choice. And it's totally fine. As long as it's working for you, you are, if you can, able to progress out into a different option over time because that's what you want. Cool. But for certain people, they're a super, super great option, and there's nothing wrong with that. So that's number one, machines. Number two, this one's kind of personal, but people will say that sumo stance deadlifts are cheating. Sumo stance deadlifts are cheating. I have had so many people on social media tell me that my deadlift didn't count because I was doing a sumo deadlift. So if you're unaware, sumo deadlift is a very wide stance deadlift with your arms on the inside of your legs, as opposed to a conventional or even a hex bar deadlift where your arms are on the outside of your legs with more of a narrow stance in your legs. Sumo is the opposite. Your legs are very wide. Exactly how wide depends on the person, but your arms are on the inside of that. And there are different challenges to using sumo compared to conventional, and there are different reasons why someone might choose sumo over conventional. But it's sort of, I don't know where it came from and why this attitude has developed that sumo deadlifting is cheating. It's not real. It's not as hard. It's making it easier on the lifter, et cetera, et cetera. You can sumo deadlift in powerlifting. If you are a powerlifter, you can sumo deadlift. And I have seen many people who are incredibly strong sumo deadlift. So it's not like it's a weaker pull or something of that nature, but it is a little bit challenging. So I want to talk about that. But bottom line, if you choose to sumo deadlift and you're able to pull the weight off the floor and come to an extended hip position, you stood up with the weight, you lifted it off the floor, it is not cheating. Period. Point blank. So why do people say it's cheating? Because generally the bar will travel less distance off the floor compared to a conventional stance because of that very wide stance of your legs. However, if you haven't ever done heavy sumo deadlifts, you've never really tried them, you probably don't realize something very important, which is in order to break the barbell off of the floor, that first initial break off the floor movement compared to a conventional is a lot harder. It is a lot more difficult to break a sumo off the floor compared to conventional because of the stance. And because you have such a wide stance, you're also relying a lot on things like your adductors and your quads compared to something like a conventional. So sumo is arguably even though the range of motion, quote unquote, is shorter, is a lot harder on average to actually break off the floor, especially when it gets heavy. If you've ever seen me on my social media, you will probably notice that I, by and large, adopt a sumo stance. And that was an intentional decision that I made quite a long time ago because for me, conventional deadlifting just does not feel that great in my body. I learned how to sumo deadlift from Laura Phelps in an extremely cold gym in, I think it was March in Northern Ireland. It was so freezing in that gym. And Laura taught how to sumo deadlift. And I just remember thinking at the time, like, this is actually very technical and it's not the easiest stance to learn. It's a little bit more approachable for beginners to learn how to do something like a conventional. Sumo is a little bit more technical. And like I said, it's much harder to break off of the floor. But I primarily use sumo deadlift. And last year, I went through 6 months, end of last year into the beginning of this year. I did a 6-month block where I did no sumo at all, none, and worked on some variations of a conventional stance, including some deficit work, as well as a stint of Zercher deadlifts, which if you've never done Zercher deadlifts, is fun but challenging. So essentially what you have to do is get your arms underneath the bar such that the barbell is across the crook of your elbow on both sides, and then stand up with it, which is much harder than it sounds. But I did 6 months learning some different deadlift variations and incorporating that. And of course, as you can imagine, it did benefit my sumo. So when I went back to doing sumo earlier this spring and ended up PRing my sumo a few times, that was great. So I was happy to be back to it. And ironically, now I'm actually back out of it and doing some hack deadlifting, which is where the barbell is behind your back. And that's a whole other story and also very challenging. Suffice to say, I had people, the reason I bring that up is I had people commenting on my PR post saying things like, oh, well, you did it with a sumo stance, so did it really count? And I was like, seriously, we're still doing this in 2025? Oh my goodness. Okay, so sumo deadlift is not cheating. Conventional deadlift is not necessarily better. It depends on the person. So I know people who have a pretty sensitive lower back and they find that sumo is better for them because they have a little bit more of an upright posture and they're able to, again, tap into that quad and adductor use as well. So it can work better for people for different reasons in that way. If you want to bias a little bit more toward that adductor work, or if you just like it better, that's okay. It's not cheating. So I hope we answered that question once and for all. And it is legal in powerlifting as well. Okay. And that brings us to the last one. I saved the best one until last because I feel like I have the most to say on this. The number one thing that people will say is cheating in the gym is using lifting straps. Okay. So, and I just brought up powerlifting, but to be clear, if you're competing in powerlifting or Olympic lifting, you can't use straps in competition. They're not allowed. So sure, if you showed up to try to get on the platform at a competition and you had straps, you probably wouldn't be able to lift, or your lift wouldn't count if you somehow were able to perform your lift. But in general, lifting straps are a really great way to make sure that your grip isn't a limiter to your training, especially when it comes to what your legs can lift. So does that mean that every single exercise you perform and every single set you do, including your warm-ups, you have to use straps? No, you don't have to, but they can be a great assist. And so quite oftentimes, especially once my Strong with Steph lifters start to build a little bit, they're out of the first, especially 3 months. And now, for some of the accessory work, they're starting to see higher repetitions. Maybe they're seeing some more single leg work, or something like lunges or single leg RDLs or something of that nature. And they're having to hold on to the weight, whether it's barbells, dumbbells, etc. And those, especially unilateral or more unilateral bias exercises, we're having to do both sides. And so the time that we're holding the weights starts to increase. And quite oftentimes what I'll hear from people in accessory work, or also just in heavier strength work, is that, I just didn't go up because I couldn't hang on to the bar. And my answer is almost always a resounding, did you use lifting straps? And quite oftentimes they'll say, no, I thought I shouldn't because I'm supposed to work on my grip. We get a ton of grip work in strength training in general, as it is. And sometimes we have to work on specific grip work if we want to increase our grip strength. And that can be an accessory that we do. And I did a podcast on accessory work. It's actually the one before this, so you can go back and check that one out. For example, part of grip strength is forearm muscle strength. And you might have to work on some of your forearm musculature. And there are specific exercises you could do to bring that up a little bit. But you just kind of have to know that you might be doing a workout where there's a lot of grip work involved, or the time that you're holding the weights is starting to go up. And what we don't want to have happen is that you start to underload especially your legs. If there is one mistake, and I'll probably do a podcast on this, like all the things I wish I could say very bluntly about lifting and why people maybe aren't getting the results that they want. But especially when it comes to legs, a lot of people underload. I don't care if you're doing sets of 3 or you're doing sets of 20. We have to pick a load that's challenging enough. And quite oftentimes, we start to run into challenges with the grip, and so we won't go up in weight. And in the short term, that might not be a huge deal, but if that continues for a while, we might start to see just lack of adaptation. We're not getting a stimulus because we're lifting the same weights over time. So in the interest of your legs, getting the proper stimulus and making sure that your grip isn't the limiter in what your legs especially can lift, I highly recommend using lifting straps to a lot of my lifters for those reasons. And again, take your warm-up sets. Usually people take their warm-up sets without them, or they're going to do some of their earlier work sets without them. And then as the weight starts to climb and they need a little bit more assist, then they'll put their straps to good use. But there are also, I want to put this out there for people who are like, that's cheating. I want to give you some other use cases for why it's not cheating. So I had a client who had hyperhidrosis. Hyperhidrosis is when you have excessively sweaty palms, and no amount of chalk or gloves or any of that was going to help her. And so she had extremely sweaty hands and had to use lifting straps so she could actually hold on to the weight. So she had a medical condition in which using straps really helped her, really helped her. And of course, again, this is actually a use case in some cases for something like machines in certain contexts as well. Although It depends on the exercise, but in some cases, you're maybe not holding onto weight as much as you are pressing against handles or something of that nature. Clients of mine, some of them have osteoarthritis, and in particular of their hands or wrists. And that can make holding the weight more painful or just harder. And so am I to look at a client who has osteoarthritis and, their doctor has cleared them to lift, and of course, be sensible about their progression and loading and things like that. But they're out there doing the thing, but they need some assist because if they overtax the grip, then that could potentially be an issue. So they use lifting straps and they're able to get a great workout. Or also if you have finger or hand injuries, one of my clients had trigger finger and so needed to have hand surgery. And of course she had to avoid that hand for a while, and we had to get creative with some of the different variations of exercises that she did. But, in that case, using something like a lifting strap could be helpful. I have had finger injuries from jujitsu that made it really hard to grip the bar, especially when my fingers were very inflamed and swollen. I've probably torn ligaments in both of my ring fingers, and I actually can't fully straighten them now because I'm a guard player. Guard life, if you do jujitsu, you kind of know. But in any case, when I had both of those finger injuries, not simultaneously, but it was actually really hard to hold on to a bar for a long set because my finger was really swollen. So all of that said, it's not cheating to use lifting straps. Now, there are some cases where you have to be kind of careful when you're using straps and especially know how to use them properly. If you're doing like overhead barbell work, I'm not going to say you can never use lifting straps. And most of the people that do my programs are not doing Olympic lifting, but in Olympic lifting, you have to really know how to use straps correctly if you're doing overhead work, for example, snatch work or something like that. But we did use them a ton in things like clean pulls, snatch pulls, and that sort of accessory work. So know the context, know the reasoning for using the straps, make sure you know how to use them properly is also very important, and you know how to let them go so that you can release the weights safely, et cetera, et cetera. But don't be afraid to use lifting straps. They're very inexpensive. Of course, you can get more expensive styles like, for example, a Versa Grip, but I have honestly been rocking the same $15 pair of Rogue Ohio lifting straps for years. And they're simple, but they get the job done. I always keep a pair in my bag. I bring them to the gym with me. And that is what it is. So lifting straps, not cheating, can be a great tool and a great assist, especially to make sure that your lower body is getting the stimulus that it needs for growth and change. Like I said, there's so many more of these. I would love to hear from you. Go ahead and send me a DM on Instagram. What's the most wild thing someone has told you is cheating in the gym? Send me a message. I'd love to hear it because there's so much out there. But on this episode, we covered 3 of the more common. The first one was machines. The second one, saying sumo deadlifts are cheating. And then the third one, lifting straps. And hopefully now you have a better sense for the context. And also, thanks for allowing me to catch you up on all of the stuff that's been happening in my world, business-wise and also personally. I just appreciate you again. Thanks for being around and listening to the show and keeping me going for the last decade. Yesterday, I was a guest on a podcast and hadn't talked about really how I got into strength training in a while. Got into strength training in 2010. I came out of the endurance world, and sitting down and really talking about that relit a lot of passion in me and a lot of excitement for what I do, and remembering the mission and why I do this work. Sometimes it does get a little hard on social media, or, business is just challenging. If anybody who's ever run a business knows, there are a lot of things, a lot of moving parts, and a lot of challenges. And sitting down and just having that conversation about why I started lifting and how it changed me in a really positive way, and then why I was so compelled to make this my work and to work with all of you and to put this idea and message about strength training out into the world really reminded me about why I love this and why I'm so committed to it and why I believe in it so much all these years later. So again, thank you so much for being part of the community on Instagram, for being on my newsletter. There's some of you who have been around since the very beginning. And I also did celebrate 12 years of starting my own business and still being here to talk about it. And that was in June. So last month, it was 12 years. So super appreciative of all of you. Thank you for being here. Thanks for listening to the show. Please do me a favor and share it out if you find it useful. You love this episode or other episodes that I've done. Please share it out to a friend and please subscribe. It does make a difference. It really helps other people who have similar interests to discover the show and the mission, which is to help women over 40 get strong as fuck and do cool shit. So thanks for being with me. I will catch you next time. And until then, you know the drill. Stay strong.